Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Now, I would like to tell a story. Years ago, I was probably only like 14, 15 years ago, 15 years old, and I was fishing down in Howe Sound. And there was quite a long trail, basically a hiking trail, that would take me to the location in which I was fishing. And throughout the way, I heard knocking on a tree. Almost sounded like a rock knocking against a tree. And I didn't think much of it. In the small neighborhood around there were some people doing some construction at the time. It sounded closer than that, but I thought it was some sort of echo or, overhearing something to do with that. And so I go fishing to not tons of luck, and I got snagged a few times on the rocks, and I ran out of bait. So I did have some bait in the freezer at home, which isn't a super long walk, about a 15-minute walk. So I decided, well, I'm going to fish for a little longer, but I need to go back and get some bait. So I took the same trail back. And I really noticed this time that the knocking on the tree was very close to me. It was not super far off in the distance. It was very, very close. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna have a look and see what this is all about. And you're probably thinking now at this point that it's going to be some sort of Sasquatch story, which it is, but this actually isn't necessarily a witness story about the Sasquatch, because as most people know, even people that aren't that into Sasquatch or whatever know that tree knocking is a pretty common thing in the reports, and the investigators that look for Sasquatch and that try to mimic tree knocking and whatnot. But this is a little bit different, so stick with me. So I thought I would go have a look, and I sort of located where it seemed like the noise was coming from, and I quietly sort of pushed myself through the trees and whatnot to see if I could get a better look. And I'd say about 10-15 feet away from me, higher, about not super high up, but about midway up a relatively large tree, I seen the forearm, and I'm going to use the word paw because that's what I seen at the time. It looked like, as here on the west coast, the Sunshine Coast, we have cougars, mountain lions. And what this looked like to me was a cougar paw. Like, I've seen lots of cougars, I know what their paws look like, tracks, all that sort of stuff, and it looked like a cougar paw. The only thing is it was black, it wasn't blonde. As most people should know, mountain lions are blonde. It was black. And I didn't see an actual rock in its hand. I did not actually see that, but it was going like this, tapping on the tree. And the noise that it was making sounded very similar to as if there was a rock tucked into its paw, which I don't believe that cougars do that. At least I've never heard of it or came across it at all. It wouldn't surprise me, but I'm sure they'd have the ability to if they really wanted to, but I don't really see why, and I don't really see the purpose. I don't even know why they would be tapping on a tree, to tell you the truth, but that's what it looked like to me. It looked like a cougar paw, bottom line. But the thing that stuck out to me was that it was black. And what I was thinking, as far as witnessing anything that's rare to see or unusual, not mythological by the way, but just unusual, I was thinking that maybe I was seeing a panther. And you might laugh, being that I live in Canada, but the true science of a panther is we think of them in South America, and that's most likely where you're commonly going to see them on television. But a panther actually isn't its own species. Scientifically speaking, what a panther is it is any sort of large cat. It can be a lion, it can be a tiger, it can be a jaguar, it can be a mountain lion, a cougar, that genetically similar to how some animals end up being albino, like an albino elk or something like that. It's a rare genetic, a rare thing that happens genetically, that the odd animals here and there are born albino. Well, it's the same with cats when it comes to the black coloring as a panther. It can be any species of cat, any large cat, and every once in a blue moon, ones are born with the black coloring to them, and that is called a panther. A panther can be referred to as a mountain lion, a lion, a jaguar. Like I'm repeating, any large cat species. That's how it works in nature. So I was mainly thinking that, and I started telling people about the story, and I wasn't like, this wasn't something that I was shy to talk about or reluctant to talk about, like over ridicule or anything like that, because most people that I know are animal people and live in a relatively wild area. They know about animals and wildlife. And yeah, and at the time I was like, okay, I don't know if I seen something wrong or what the deal was. I don't know if it had a rock in its paw, or if it was, or why it would be tapping on the tree, or if it was for some reason, if it wasn't a rock, it was just, you know, the sound of its claws or the palm of its paw hitting the tree, which is unlikely that it would make that kind of noise. That's kind of the only thing I can't fully explain, unless there was something that I wasn't seeing, because I didn't see the rest of the body. That's all I seen. And I was only like 14, 15, I got kind of spooked, and so I slowly just, if it were now, I would have investigated more and I would have wanted to see the full thing. But at that age, which that's typical for any sort of unusual sighting story, too, is for some reason they didn't see the whole thing. Which I hate to be one of the people that's contributing to that cliche, but it is the truth. I got kind of spooked and I slowly backed away and went off, because cougars aren't really something that you want to mess around with. So, back to what I was saying before. I wasn't super shy to talk about this, because witnessing a panther it's rare, but it's not something that you're going to be ridiculed for or necessarily disbelieved per se. It's somewhat common. And I started telling a bunch of people about this, and you know, a lot of my family members and that were just like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. I mean, it's possible, you know, every once in a while a cougar will, you know, have the black shading to it and be a panther, and I don't know, maybe it was just the sound of it on the tree, whatever. They were relatively just like, okay, this is kind of a cool story, like, you know, that's interesting, you know, but I'm not entirely sure. And a lot of other people, I was so amazingly surprised, if that's a proper sentence to use, I don't know. But so many people that I was telling this story to, the Sasquatch thing, other than the sound of the rock in its hand, like I was saying before, wasn't on my mind at all, really. And a whole bunch of people that I was saying to was like, oh, that sounds totally like the Sasquatch, man. Like, and not all these people fully believed in the Sasquatch either, but they were like, oh, you should totally, you know, report that and call the BFRO, which is, I think, the Bigfoot Research Organization of Canada, something like that. And they're like, oh yeah, you should report that sighting, and on and on. And I was so baffled by this. I was like, wow, like I thought, you know, like I always thought Sasquatch was kind of cool. I liked the documentaries made about them. I like the mythology behind it. I don't fully believe in it, or I don't fully disbelieve in it either. You know, it's kind of just what it is, but it's fun and interesting, and there's some unique things to learn about it. And that's about it. And you know, I've done a couple of Sasquatch documentaries on the channel, and I hope to delve into that some more over time too, because I do find it very fun and very fascinating. But you know, I thought for sure that, you know, anything, you know, that for the most part people would be like, oh, it was the shading of the way the sunlight was hitting it, or, you know, the shadows of the trees that made it look black, but it was probably just a regular cougar, or, you know, it was probably just one of the neighbor's kids climbing a tree, or just like something stupid like that. But I was like so surprised that nobody was really questioning me on the validity of this story, which I can honestly say is true. There's not a lie in it, but nobody disbelieved me, and everybody was bringing up the Sasquatch, like this is the big thing, like, you know, you should totally get on this. And I'm not going to mention the business, I'm not going to mention the store, the person, or anything like that for the next part of this story, as it actually probably wouldn't even matter because the business doesn't exist anymore. But there was a place in a small, like, family-run place here in Gibson's. And the woman who basically owned the place, or at least was the one that mostly ran it, she was heavy duty into the Sasquatch. There was posters of it all up on her store. There was books that you could buy, books that were like chained to a little stand that you could like sample and read, and there was like a little catalog book to mark sightings down in. And apparently her stepfather is like a Bigfoot researcher and author, and he writes books. He goes out, investigates this, and he writes books about his experiences. And so I tell her the story, and I told her it exactly. I didn't embellish anything, make it seem like it was Sasquatch. I told her exactly as I told everybody else. And she was thrilled with it. She was so fascinated with it. She was like, oh, you should totally, you know, report this to my stepdad. He'll include this in the book, and he'll use this as part of his research. And you know, he's been wanting to come up this way. He's done a couple investigations up here, but he's been wanting to come up this way for a long time, but there hasn't been the proper material and the time and whatnot, but this might coax him to come up here and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, sure, okay. She gives me the phone number. I'm like, all right. So I decided, okay, there's been about 15 people telling me about this now and encouraging me to report this. So whatever, I'm just gonna do it. So I call the guy, I tell him the story, I tell him about, you know, me knowing his stepdaughter that runs the so-and-so company, and that I told him truthfully how it was, and that she wanted me to report it to you, and that potentially, you know, you're working on a book right now. This story is going to be added into the book, and you're going to mark it down as part of your research, and so on and so forth. And he was, like, I think most people that study strange things, he was skeptical yet believed at the same time. Like, he was trying to weed out like prank callers and people that just wanted to call him to talk because they're hardcore fanatics of the subject and his work and whatnot. And so he sort of took things slower, but is sort of gauging what kind of person I'm going to be. And eventually he opened up, and we had like almost like a 20-minute conversation over the phone. And I was basically just expressing that this is what happened, and I never really thought anything about Sasquatch, but that seems to be what the town's consensus on, which I'm the opposite. I see on these documentaries there's people that hide their stories from the town because they're worried about being ridiculed. I'm the opposite. Most of the people I knew in the town were encouraging me to do all of this and think of it that way and whatnot. So, and I'm expressing all of this, right? I'm saying all that, and he's like, oh yeah, well this is very valuable information. Thank you so much for calling. And you know, he said, I'm working on this book right now, and I'm sort of collecting eyewitness reports from different people in Canada, particularly BC, as that's where he lived, in the interior of BC somewhere. And he said, you know, if you don't mind, I'm definitely going to, you know, take note of this, and I very well could add it into, you know, the West Coast BC Sunshine Coast chapter of the book. And I'm like, yeah, by all means, go for it. And, you know, asked if I wanted to remain anonymous or keep my name on there or whatnot. And I was like, yeah, I don't really care, you know, it doesn't matter to me, use my name. If you want, don't. If you don't want to, it's not a huge deal to me. I'm not really shy or nervous about that in any way. And so he's like, okay, yeah, thank you very much for the info. And, you know, hope to talk to you again sometime. And nothing ever happened for me to report in, so I never spoke to him again. But I've read several of his books, and his books are very well written, and he's an adventurer, and the way that he describes his adventures is very, very cool and entertaining to read. And besides the Sasquatch, he's sort of into strange, kind of unexplainable things, so there's some other sort of um, things that are a bit more based in reality per se that he's came across. They're just a little bit strange that are also included into the books. Um, that are very interesting, and like I said, I have read 3 of them, and they're very good. And just for the purpose of the subject matter of this video, I'm not going to mention the author, but I will maybe do like a book review or something, and then you'll see whose book it is, because I'll mention the author then. That would be probably a more appropriate way to, to do that. But anyway, I have no idea. None of the books I read, I don't think they were the ones that the one that he was working on at the time. I think they were ones that came out a bit before that. But I haven't really read any since, so I have no idea. And this was still years back. I mean, I'm 27 now. I was, what, 14, 15 then, so how long ago was that? So the book's not new anymore. But I never ended up reading it. I never heard of it coming out or anything like that. I have no idea if my story was actually incorporated into it or not. Yeah, I really don't know about that. But so I found it, and also I contacted a few other, there was, believe it or not, and I didn't see them, I haven't seen them much since, but there was some sort of local Bigfoot people here on the Sunshine Coast that are sort of obscure, but they are here. And I managed to track down their contact info, and I told them about the location, and I believe that they didn't contact me again or come find me or include me in it really or anything like that, but I did see their truck in the area in which this happened, like, because I live near there. So I did see their truck down there once or twice, so that was interesting. I didn't bother them or anything, but I was like, oh, maybe they're here because they heard something from me. And so that's basically that. And like I said, still to this day, I don't want to sound mean to the people that really were fascinated by it as valuable info for the Sasquatch community, but I don't think it was Sasquatch. I didn't think that at the time. I believe it was either a panther, if it was anything, you know, unusual to see, or yeah, maybe it was one of those rare things. I don't see that happening to me much because I spend a lot of time in the woods. I'm not, you know, somebody that's going to mistake a lot of things, but maybe the shade from the tree made the fur look darker than it was, or, you know, I don't know, something like that. Or maybe it was still blonde but just had a darker tinge to it, and then the shading covered over it. I don't, it sounds far-fetched to me, but I don't know. But I was veering more towards a panther, but nonetheless, it was somewhat valuable information for these Sasquatch researchers, which I was super surprised by. And so basically the moral of the story is my opinion on these mythological creatures that we write stories about, that we make movies about, and that some people get so heavily into that they research. I think what it goes to show, and I believe that there are things out there in the world that we cannot explain and that we can't fully understand. I mean, we're just because we're a smart species, human beings, but we're not the end-all be-all. There's a whole grand, large universe out there, and you know, there's only so much the human eye can see, and all of our equipment is still created by us, which it has a limited capacity to understand everything. And in the deep woods, down in the deepest parts of the ocean, in space, in the sky, all of that, there's all kinds of things. There's definitely things out there that we are unaware of, that we don't understand fully, and that are unexplained, and that we don't know about. I do believe that. But I am very skeptical at the same time of most stories and documentaries and in books, even for that matter, and people online that are yapping about this stuff. That sounds super rude, being that I've yapped a long time about it right now. But anyway, the moral of the story at the end of the day is, I think that there will always be stories written, there will always be movies made, there will always be documentaries made, there will always be people who are interested in this sort of a thing, because as Tolkien spoke about the distant mountains in his story of the Lord of the Rings, there was always something in the horizon that maybe you've seen it, maybe you didn't, maybe the characters got to it, maybe they didn't, but no matter how far they got, there was always the distant mountains. And that is a very romantic thought for us emotional human beings. And the distant mountains in our hearts loves to believe and speculate on something that we cannot fully understand beyond the tree line in front of us, below us when we're in the boat or when we're swimming, above us when we're anywhere on land. And I think the world would be a boring place without it. I think that it adds a lot more intrigue and also fun. Most of all, fun. Some people take it too seriously. Don't do that, by the way. It's fun. At the end of the day, it's fun. It's where it should remain mainly fun. It should be 90% fun, 10%, serious and speculative and whatnot. And I think that the Sasquatch lives in our heart. I think that the dragon lives in our heart, as we're just entering the year of the dragon. I think that the distant mountains are in our heart. I think that any mystical being or creature, ghosts, apparitions, UFOs, you name it, they might be real, they might not be. There might be all sorts of ways that you can look at it, and all sorts of incredibly fun ways that you can write about it and make stories and documentaries about it. But at the end of the day, they do exist in our hearts. And what is out there is, to some people, it could be a manifestation of what is in their heart. To some, it could be reality, and whatever it is something that we will never stop being fascinated with. So those are just some thoughts. And I thought I'd share a story and share some thoughts at the same time. And I hope you enjoyed, and I'd love to read your comments in the section down below. Thank you very much.